throws, and it's intercepted. It's intercepted by number 22. That's Clifton. He's got the left edge. Turns on the Jets. Still on his feet. Touchdown, Calaveras. What a play. Up to a running back. That's Ferrante over to the right side. He comes back up the middle. He's got room. One man to beat. He turns on the Jets. There he goes. Touchdown, Calaveras. What a play. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Let's Talk Football with Coach Val. I'm your host, Gil Valtierra, the voice of Calaveras football. This episode, we dive into a new topic, which is the CIF and the governance of high school football. I could not be more excited to have my special guest today, the Associate Commissioner in charge of high school football over at the Sac Joaquin Section of the CIF, Mr. Jason Feuerbach. Jason, thanks so much for joining us today. I know you have a very busy schedule with all the sports you're in charge with. Why don't you share with our listeners your background? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? And what got you involved in being a part of the CIF?
Awesome. Well, first and foremost, Val, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to this conversation and just being able to share some insight into high school football in the Sac Joaquin Section and why I feel like it's special and why I enjoy, overseeing it from our office. First, for me, I grew up actually in the Sac Joaquin Section. I went to college in the Sac Joaquin Section. I worked in the Sac Joaquin Section before I came to work with the CIF. And so I grew up in Galt, California. And so Galt was a lot smaller when I grew up there. We got our first stoplight when I was in high school, and that town's grown significantly since. Enjoyed going to school there. I was a Galt Warrior and played football there. After that, I had the opportunity to go to UC Davis and study there. I tried to play a little football, but got railroaded there with some major injuries. But at the time when I was at UC Davis, I really enjoyed working with just young athletes, and it quickly became a passion of mine. And I started actually coaching high school football at the age of 20 years old. And so kind of went down that route and got involved in education. And from there, started teaching as soon as I got out of college and got my teaching credential, and ended up in 2005 at Whitney High School up in Rockland. And went there as a football coach and science teacher at that time. From there, kind of got involved in student activities a little bit, continued to coach. And then in 2012, got the opportunity and the chance to be the athletic director and as an administrator on the side as well. And so kind of got more involved in the administrative side of athletics at that point and really enjoyed it. And so in 2021, the Sac Joaquin Section opened up an associate commissioner spot, and applied for it and interviewed and was fortunate enough to be offered the job. So been with the Sac Joaquin Section since 2021 and do a variety of duties down here, which one of them is overseeing football in our section.
Right. Well, thank you for being willing to do this. I know I coached high school football for 24 years. And before I stepped down and decided I didn't want to do that anymore. And then during those 24 years, I've, had a lot of involvement as far as with the CIF and learning the bylaws and the rules and all of that good stuff. And so having you on is actually pretty exciting because there's so much that's changed, even just in the last few years. And, I had Manny Mosa, who's the head varsity coach at Calaveras High School now, called me yesterday and said, hey, ask him this. And he already's got questions for you. So I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. So I'm sure we're going to approach a lot of those questions.
Hopefully I can answer a chunk of them for you.
Why don't we start with, for our listeners out there, they're going, CIF, what is that? And maybe go through the history of the CIF, how many schools in our section that are under, the Sac Joaquin Section, what they're governing. And then, why do we need the CIF? Why do the schools need them?
No, those are all very good questions. Yeah, so the state CIF, so the state, California Interscholastic Federation started in 1920, and that was when it got its original roots going. From there, our specific section started in 1942. And the way the state of California is divided up, very similar to like a state and local government. And so the state CIF would be very similar to like your state government structure. And then as you filter down to the sections, those are more like your county or your local governments. And so there's 10 sections in the state of California, and the Sac Joaquin section is one of those. We span a huge area. We span approximately from the Yuba City area, Sutter, kind of that, all the way up to, we have a school, Sierra Academy of Expeditionary Learning up in Truckee. And we kind of follow from there, heading south, kind of follow the Delta and the Sierras there. And we go almost, go clear down to Merced, Los Banos, Somerville, and some of those areas. And so, we span a pretty big area. Overall, we have 202 high schools. Of those 202, 153 offer football. And so pretty big section. We're the second biggest in the state, only behind the southern section. So we're number 2 out of the 10. And that's kind of what we oversee from there. In regards to the CIF, it's kind of in a unique model in that we are a federation. And so it's really our member schools that drive our rules, our bylaws, and a lot of our decisions. And so we have a board of managers, which every school is represented on by their league and their league president. And from there, that board of managers is where, our constitution and our bylaws come from. And so we're a nonprofit organization, and we are, we're basically a body that enforces rules that are set by our member schools. And so if our member schools want to switch a rule or add a new rule or change something, they go through the process, and if the schools vote in favor of it, then that rule or amendment becomes the new bylaw. And so kind of a different model there. We're not a top-down model. We're truly a bottom-up model as we govern high school sports. And so that's kind of how the overall structure and how it's set up.
That makes sense. And when you really think about it, you go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And sometimes from the outside looking in, it could look like it's the other way around, that top bottom, where, you have this big, mammoth governing body looking at you, shaking their finger at you like, no, you can't do that. But in reality, it's the other way around. It's the school saying, the league's voting on what they want to do, and it goes the other way. So that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Are there any, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and I was just going to say, I'm sure through this conversation, I'll be able to give you some examples of how that specific system does actually work, specifically in the sport of football.
Sure. Are there any other governing agencies that manage other schools in football, or is the CIF pretty much it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, for the state and our section, I mean, the CIF is obviously a huge portion of kind of that governing body and what happens. The CIF is listed in Ed Code as the governing body of high school sports in the state of California. But from there, also, a lot of our sport-specific rules in regards to the gameplay, those are set by the National Federation of High Schools. And so the term we use is the NFHS, and they are the body that sets like sport-specific rules, the rule books, and how some of that stuff works. And so at the beginning of the season, our football coaches, they all get a rule book, and that rule book is created and maintained by the NFHS, the National Federation of High Schools. So they're the other big, kind of governing body of high school sports throughout the nation.
Right.
And then from there, the CIF's kind of the other part that pretty much does run the show.
Okay. Just recently, I mentioned I did 13 years over at Calaveras. We're part of the Motherlode League. And there was some realignment a couple of times while I was coaching. And just recently, this coming next football season that's getting started here in the next couple of months, the new Motherlode League looks completely different. The CIF goes through what they call realignment. It looks like from the website you're on the committee that helps with realignment. Can you tell us how often realignment happens? And then is realignment just about like parity in competition, or are there other factors involved?
No, yeah, that I could definitely kind of go through some of that stuff. Yeah, so realignment is basically when we take all of our schools and we take all of our leagues and we look at, overall, like kind of the philosophy is what's best for the student athletes, what's best for the school, and there are a variety of factors that go into that. So our realignment process ideally occurs every 4 years. This past one was every 6. We were supposed to do it 2 years earlier, but with the COVID situation in there,
right,
the pandemic kind of delayed it a little bit. And so it has been 6 years since our previous realignment, which created a few issues for us. But normally on a standard cycle, it's every 4 years. And the way it works is basically a committee is selected by the membership. So there's a couple at-large spots, there's certain administrative spots, different things, but a committee is selected. And we have public meetings. And so the initial proposal is presented by our office. So we sit in, meetings, we talk to leagues, we look at different parameters. We come up with the initial proposal, we present it and why we're putting schools in certain leagues. And then from there, through a series of meetings, the athletic directors, the principals, different school sites, we've heard from superintendents, they can get up, they can talk to the committee, and the committee can make moves to that proposal. And every year they make quite a few moves, or every time I've seen realignment take place. And so the committee hears different arguments from different ADs and different school sites, and they move schools around. And then eventually, when there are no more, presentations, there are no more moves by that committee, we conclude the meeting or the meetings. I think we had 5 in this past realignment. And then that realignment plan goes to a vote of the member schools. So every member school gets 1 vote.
Okay.
So that's that's how it's kind of set up overall. In regards to things that we look at school enrollment. So that's a factor. I would tell you that's a very important factor in our section. And a lot of our schools, that is very important to them, is that school enrollment, basically, how big are you? And so that's a piece we look at. We look at scope of program, that being how many overall sports do you offer? Do you offer 12, 18, 25, 26? Just how many overall different sports do you offer on your campus? We do look at your success. How do you do in the team sports? We have, different rankings, different ratings there where we add things up and kind of look at that. And then secondary criteria we do look at is travel and location, but that is not one of the main ones.
Okay. So it's not just, they're really good at football and they're killing everybody in their league, but they're going to look at, how big your school is, or maybe you used to be big and your enrollment's dropped off, and other factors that are involved there other than just wins and losses.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussions, and a lot of it is, it looks at a lot more than just wins and losses and how you're doing. That's a piece of the puzzle, but there are also a lot of other things that we look at.
Okay. Would you say, my next question, around you look at rule changes and a lot's happened over the last several years, I know, with rules, but is football the major sport that's dictating rule changes and sanction issues, or are there other sports contributing to this, or is football the main one?
Are you talking more rule changes overall for the governing body or in each specific sport?
I'm talking more around, I guess overall for the governing body, I would say, because it seems to me when I look at the bylaws, like there's been a lot of changes, especially around, change of address, and there's coaches following kids where they go to school, and there's been a lot of changes over the last decade or so around that area. I guess my question is there one sport that's dictating those rule changes more than other sports, or is it just a culmination of all of it?
I mean, I would say it's a culmination of all of it on our end as we talk with our schools, but because football is so big, just in regards to number of participants, the media, the advertising, the attendees at whether it's home sites and the number of people that show up, or our championship events and the number of people that show up. Obviously, football is a very, very public sport that a lot of people pay attention to. So sometimes, you'll see something happen in the sport of football that'll spur a movement, just because it's very public, right? Everybody hears about it, everybody sees it. Whereas, maybe the tennis student athlete that transferred or did something just doesn't get the publicity that like a football player does. And so, I would say that it's really a culmination of everything. And when we look at stuff behind the scenes, we look at data across the board, where we're seeing issues. But like I said, there are times where football, because it is so public, that obviously we have to look at certain things there, whether it is our ejection policy or how we're going to handle this situation, because there's a lot of eyes on it. There's a lot of eyes on it.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay. Can you help me understand, and this is something that for a long time, and I could be off or maybe something's changed, but help me understand the differences in the rules around open enrollment for, say, private, like Christian schools, private schools, and then a bona fide change of residence, between, public schools and what they go through. If both private schools and public schools are under the same umbrella of the bylaws of the CIF, it seems to me like there's still a difference there between who can go to what school.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a couple different pieces to this one. So first, in regards to standard public schools, and we in our section, we have public schools, we have private schools, and we have some charter schools. And with your public schools, those school board governing bodies, they establish residential lines. So if you live on this street in this house, you go to this high school. And that's pretty standard. So throughout our section with all of our public schools, depending where you live, dictates which public school you should attend. Now, most districts have a process and a procedure where that student athlete can enroll at another school in that district, if they follow certain steps. But for the most part, where you live dictates, what public school you should attend. For us, once you basically start school in 9th grade, and we have a little caveats, but for the most part, once you start school, then that is what we call your home school, whether it's where you live or not. But that's kind of how public schools work. Private schools obviously don't have those boundary lines. So whereas you can, live 20, 30, 40 miles from a private school, drive in and attend school there. So they don't have those specific boundaries and lines that we see from the public schools. And so in theory, kind of the open enrollment piece is the private schools and the charter schools. They're trying to get kids on their campus where, who are interested, who or believe in, maybe the specific religion they're about, or, the charter schools are trying to cater to certain, maybe trades or certain skills they want those students to learn.
Sure.
And so they're more of an open enrollment, whereas the publics aren't. Now we do see some public schools where they are so impacted just because of the size of their school and the number of kids that live in their boundaries that they don't take anybody that lives outside of their boundaries. Whereas we see other public schools that have been built big enough where within their boundaries, they can't fill the entire campus. And so they'll allow students that live in other boundaries to enroll and register at their school, even though they might not live in their boundaries. So overall, that's kind of how the public versus private and charter is kind of set up in regards to enrollment. From there, we do see families move and move residents from different schools. So what we look at and the way our bylaw is written is if you live in attendance boundary A of a school. So, if I live in an attendance boundary and I'm supposed to go to school ABC, and my family picks up and we move to a different home, and now I'm supposed to go to school DEF, then when you move from that one attendance boundary to another, and it's...
You still there? You still there?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Lost you there for a few seconds.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's okay. We were moving to DEF. Yeah.
So if you move to attendance boundary and you're supposed to attend school DEF, then within parameters that would be considered a valid change of residence, and you can enroll at that new school. And so that's kind of how those work a little bit, kind of back and forth, and where we see those true change of residences.
Okay. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, it's not so much the CIF saying, here are the rules, but like you said earlier when we started this conversation, it's the other way around. It's the schools and the school districts making their own rules for their area and boundaries, and then you guys are just basically obliging them in those rules.
Correct. In regards to who can attend their campus or attend school on their campus, that is up to that school district and that school.
So a brand new public school, say they open up, or a brand new public school, they could declare themselves open enrollment and take anybody if they chose to do so.
Yeah. So a new school opens up. I mean, I'm assuming the district at that point would draw some lines and say, okay, if you live within these boundary lines, you have to go to this school. But then also knowing maybe they had more room or different, different situations, they might say, okay, any other students that are interested in attending this school, you can as well after you go through our process. So a lot of times they're going to look at discipline records, grades, and different things before, and your former school district has to sign off as well. And so those two school districts would work together if you're from outside the district for you to transfer in and attend school at their new school. If it's in the same district, then it would just follow their district protocols.
Gotcha. Okay. And then so they'd look, like you said, they'd look at disciplinary and I don't know, grades and all that other stuff. And the facetious part of me is saying height, weight, 40 time might come into play there.
Yeah, right? Like, I'm sure
he's 6'5".
Kid walks in the door. Yep.
240. I think we can work with this kid.
Yep. So, no, I mean, yeah, at that point, it's kind of the integrity of the school site and the district that comes into play.
Of course. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting to know because from the outside looking in, I always thought it was the CIF imposing who could do what, and really it was just the other way around. The schools are drawing their own lines and making these rules.
Yeah, we don't tell you if you live in this home, you have to go to this school. That's up to the school districts.
Gotcha. So Jason, the next question I have, we actually had some experiences at Calaveras. We in football a few years back, I believe it was like maybe during the COVID time, we had self-reported an ineligible player that was accidentally put in at the end of the game. And it wasn't found out until after it was over. And when we put him in, it was one of those deals where you're up like 45-10. It's the fourth quarter. Who else hasn't got to play? And you get those kids in to get them a little playing time. And so we put that kid in, and then it turned out later we self-reported that he shouldn't have been in there. And then we, of course, then had to forfeit that game, and it was a playoff game. And so the next week, we were eliminated from the playoffs as a result of that mistake. My question around that is, does the CIF ever consider the actual result of a violation in relation to the spirit of the rule, or is it just like black and white? Sorry, here's the sanction.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of it's black and white. Just we try to stay away from interpreting things, right? Where we're trying to be like, okay, was the game in control? Was the game basically over? Like, we try to stay away from a lot of those situations where there's that gray area, and we're trying to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together to build the picture, just because it makes it really hard. And with 202 schools in our office, I mean, total, including our secretaries, there's only 7 of us. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have a huge office. We don't have a compliance department that could really look into situations, right?
Right.
So unfortunately, just because of the way it's set up, a lot of it's just black and white. You play an ineligible player, you forfeit. Versus kind of like what you alluded to was, what's that spirit of that rule, and diving into it and being able to do that for across the board, all sports, all situations. We just simply don't have the hours to make that happen. So there are certain situations where we look at why did the violation occur? what happens there. And we build a lot of things on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times the public will just see that initial, oh, they have to forfeit because they played an ineligible player.
Right.
But as we talk to those school sites and start to look at kind of why, what breakdown in the system led to the playing of that ineligible player, that's where we put a lot of things on the back end of those sanctions to really work with the school site so that hopefully they don't run into that situation again.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you see what I mean as far as spirit of the rule, because to me, the spirit of that rule is, you don't want to be bringing in ringers, or this kid, is the 6'5", 260 kid that's going to come in and be a man amongst boys and have this big, huge difference of the game. And you knew going in that he wasn't supposed to be in there. Clearly, the scenario I described was nothing close to that, but yet the punishment is going to be the same. You see what I mean?
On the front end on that initial forfeit. Yep, you're right. The punishment's the same. It's on the back end where we add things kind of based on the situation. But yeah, you're right. It's that black and white. You played an ineligible player, you forfeit. And so that's kind of been how it's operated for a long time. We did recently start an eligibility committee that has representation from all kinds of different schools, administrators, athletic directors, district administrators, and they are starting to look at some of these rules and guidelines, and is there a rubric that's better, or different things there. And so we're kind of trying to use that committee to make sure that we're, changing with the times and staying up to date on things.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. My next question, Jason, is and this number may have changed, but the last time I looked at the CIF website, it looked like there was around 66 sanctions that was levied. You have them listed on the website of the sanctions that were levied on what school and for what sport. And 33 of those were on football. 50% of all sanctions were on football. So my question is are the football rules more stringent or harder to understand? Or why do you think it's football that has 50% of the sanctions out of all the sports?
Yeah, and that number was probably a little misleading because those kind of get loaded by season of sport, if you will. So
I see.
A lot of times, we'll see those sanctions, right, like during that season of sport. So in the fall, we're not seeing baseball. We're not issuing baseball sanctions because of a baseball team because they're not really doing anything at that time.
Okay.
So right now we're at 148 sanctions on the year, or 148 infractions that resulted in sanctions. And so in looking at that, now your percentage of football ones have dropped. One reason I think you do see a chunk of football ones is just because of the sheer number of participation of student athletes.
Okay.
Yeah. If you have 50,000 football players and you only have 5,000 basketball players, you're going to have more sanctions in football just because of the number of kids.
Okay.
So yeah, that's that part. And in full transparency, most of our sanctions, a lot of them deal with paperwork not being filled out on transfers. That's a good chunk of what schools do get in trouble for and have to self-report is an ineligible player. So either the kid was a transfer, they get cleared through our office. The kid, didn't have grades and played in a game anyways. So a breakdown in the school system there. Something along those lines, that's where we see a lot of our infractions. And so on that piece, it's probably spread proportionally throughout the sports. It's just football has more just because of the number of participants. In regards to sanctions you see that are sport specific, take the student athletes out of it where it's more breaking the overall sport rules in that specific sport. Football is harder. There are more rules just because you have the acclimatization period early on. You have a certain amount of hours all those kids need to practice and that the team needs to practice. You have it's a different setup just because, in order to keep the sport safe and as safe as possible and kind of get through that with the student athletes. So really looking at that piece, there are more rules in football than there are in other sports.
Okay. That makes sense. Jason, are there stats kept by the CIF that tell us how many of the sanctions imposed by the CIF were initially self-reported as opposed to the CIF, caught them by other means? And So, here's 100 sanctions, 80 were self-reported, 20 were they got caught with their hands in the cookie jar, in other words.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Not that I know of, and it's actually something I would like to look into, and something I'll probably do at the end of this year. And so, but yeah, we keep track of the overall sanctions. But yeah, no, definitely that's something I probably have to look into. A good chunk of ours are self-reported. I mean, like I said, we're a staff of 7. Here in our office, and so we don't have a compliance department, so it's hard. We're not going out and trying to catch people. We just don't simply have the time. And so a lot of times the only time we catch people is 2 ways. We see something on social media, or where we catch our transfer eligibility issues is when a student goes from school A to school B to school C, and school B never filled out any paperwork. So school C does, and then we go through their history to go, okay, what did we rule on this kid a year ago or 2 years ago? And it's like school B never filled out any paperwork, and the kid played anyways.
Right.
And so that's really the only way we catch people, to be honest with you. A lot of them are self-reported. And then obviously we get emails and we get phone calls from ADs reporting other schools.
Right. Okay.
So,
that was it was interesting to me because, I mean, when it's self-reported, as we mentioned earlier with the scenario that I had brought up, the same penalty it gets imposed, whether or not, you got caught with the hand in the cookie jar, so to speak. So to me, I guess my next question where I was going with this is there any concern that if the penalty is the same, will that discourage people from self-reporting?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really good question. And at some point, you got to hope the integrity of your principal and your athletic director come through.
Sure.
And that they're going to report it. But yeah, no, that's a very good question. And like I said, we do take self-reporting into account on the back end, and, to the front side, yeah, you have that forfeit. And I know that's a severe consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And the other school did the same thing. But on the back end, for the school that didn't self-report, we're going to probably make them jump through some additional hoops, whether it's trainings they need to attend, certain write-ups they need to do, follow-up meetings with us, different things. Whereas maybe that school that self-reported, they've already realized the breakdown in their system. They've already fixed it. So, some of those subsidiary consequences are different, based on what happens.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Earlier I was mentioning, Jason, about a lot of the changes. When all the years that I coached, I had gotten accustomed to the dead period, right? Which was during that time in the summer where we're not allowed to touch any equipment. We're waiting until that first day of practice was going to come. And we had that dead period where all we were allowed to do was lift weights. We couldn't touch the ball or equipment. And it looks like, looking at the bylaws for this coming season, the dead period's been eliminated and replaced by what they call a limited period. Can you help me understand that change and those differences?
Yeah, and so if you compare last year's sport calendar or this year's sport calendar to next year's, to 24, 25, huge differences in it. You're completely correct there. And so 2 years ago, this bylaw change came out of our football advisory committee. So with all of our sports, so I oversee football in the office, and I have a group of 8 coaches that represent schools from throughout our section. So inner city, rural, small, medium, large, and the north part and the south part. Just you're trying to cover all those different variables by who sits on that committee. So we had some long committee discussions, and they really wanted to change how the sport calendar was set up. And they felt that the current dead period of 3 weeks with weightlifting and conditioning, that the student athletes and the coaches weren't taking a break at all during the summer. And they didn't think that was good for the sport. They didn't think that was good for the overall health of the athletes or the coaches. And it spanned bigger than that. So it spanned all fall sports. And then it spanned to the winter and the spring, basically not having a dead period, with a lot of these schools that now have athletic PE classes that are sport specific. So basketball has their dead period, but first block, they have class and they're in the gym shooting and practicing. And then they're lifting and running after school within the confines of that dead period. And so as we kind of talked about it, it went from football advisory committee to the playoff committee. Both those groups unanimously approved it. It went to our board of managers, and then our board of managers voted on it and approved it. And the vote wasn't even close. If I remember correctly, it's like 54-4 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
But basically what our new sport calendar did is it created a universal no contact dead period for all sports from July 1st to July 14th. So if you're a high school coach, during that time period, you cannot be in contact with your athletes. So go on vacation, go be a family, rest, recover, enjoy 2 weeks out of the, a lot of weeks in the year. So just enjoy two to yourself as a family, and just step away from sports and kind of just rest and recover. And so there's a no contact dead period from July 1st to July 14th. Then we enter a limited period for a few weeks. And that limited period, you are correct. So now you can use balls, cones, agile bags, all that stuff. You just can't put on a helmet, shoulder pads, and football pants. But you can use the other equipment, and you can start getting prepared and ready to roll for the fall season. And then at the end of that limited period is then your acclimatization period to get ready to go. And so, a little bit of a change from years past, being able to use that equipment during that limited period now. And our coaches seem to be pretty happy with it.
Well, it falls right that no contact. You get the 4th of July right in the middle of that. So good job for you guys that planned all that. That's actually works out pretty good. Yeah,
and most schools are taking that week off anyways. So we just added a few extra days on it, and we'll see how it works out this first year. But I think it's going to work out really well.
All right. Well, Jason, I know we've talked a lot about, the governing portion and sanctions by the CIF, but my experience, I also know the CIF does so much more than that. They manage and pay officials for all the contests that are out there, umpires, all that stuff. I know you guys have, areas around education, scholarships, all that. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about all the stuff that the CIF does that maybe doesn't get on the front page of the media?
Yeah, no, I definitely can. And, like I tell people, I really think I have one of the best jobs that someone who loves high school sports could ever imagine. And so, you're right. A lot of times people think, oh, they're just dealing with, this ejection or this fight that happened in this game or just transfers. There's a lot more pieces to the puzzle and a lot of pieces that are very enjoyable. And so in our office, we do divide up all the sports. And so we oversee those sports. And within those sports, you're dealing with advisory committees. So, coach advisory committees where you're trying to just continue to change rules for the better of that sport. You're putting on championships. And with that, you're obviously creating brackets and you're getting all the qualifiers together and you're working with our seating committee to create those brackets and kind of all of those pieces that come into account for running a championship and then, hosting those championships at a facility and, being in charge of those and staffing them. So that's a lot of fun there. We do have a bunch of different award programs that we're in charge of, whether it's raising money through our foundation games for student scholarships, for student athlete scholarships, honoring model coaches, schools that do an outstanding job with community service. We also have a program we call our academic champions, which looks at teams that have an overall GPA that's extraordinary. So we have a bunch of award programs that we get to oversee as well. And then we carry out a bunch of different events. And so one part I'm heavily involved in our office is all of our professional development for our athletic directors and our principals. And I love every minute of that. So we have new athletic director workshops. We have athletic director workshops throughout the year for ADs that are, 2, 3, 4 years in. And then we have, we do a big one-day conference in the fall where we have about 250 attendees. And so that's a lot of fun and just all the professional development side for our schools. And then we have a Hall of Fame program that we run, a women in sports conference, things like that to kind of involve just the various constituents that are in our section. And so we do, and then like you said, there's a bunch of committees and that we run. So whether it's a sportsmanship committee, I deal with what we call our officials committee, which is then, a rep from all of our training organizations for our officials, and kind of that whole side of high school athletics. And we have a bunch of different committees like that as well. So it's a lot of fun. And definitely a lot more than just kind of what you see in the papers.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot, and I knew there was, and that's why I wanted you to go through that. Thanks very much for sharing that. Is the all this new stuff as far as like the no contact dead period from July 1 to July 14th, is that all still available on the website with the new calendar, the up and coming calendar?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, excuse me, CIF-SJS.org, and you just click on governance and then sport calendars, all that information's on there. And then we're going to host a Zoom meeting with our ADs as well coming up to kind of go over the details of that, even though they've already all read it and voted on it, just to kind of go over it and answer any questions they have.
Gotcha. Okay, well, Jason, we're just about running out of our time here. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us as far as all our listeners are, football fans, and in Calaveras County and Calaveras High School, they absolutely love their varsity football team out here. Any last words of wisdoms around CIF and high school football?
No, I mean, high school football in the Sac Joaquin Section, it's really good. We have a lot of schools participating. We have some schools that are very dynamic and do a really, really good job. We're excited to see what these new leagues and how they pan out this fall and kind of see what it looks like. And, we're making some changes on our end. You're going to see Division 7 go to a 12-team bracket overall. And so the realignment situation caused some issues there where we changed that. So, 2 years ago, that was only an 18 bracket. So that's up to 12 now. And it'll fall in line with how the other brackets are determined. And then we're working with the football advisory committee. We're looking at the overtime period and the possibility of maybe switching to a model more like the NC2A and how their overtime period works. And then we're looking at our mercy rule. That's one of our other big hot topics in football right now is the mercy rule and what that looks like and what's best for the student athletes moving forward there. So those are our hot topics, and it's going to be a fun fall, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, Jason, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it too. I'll be calling the Calaveras varsity football games on KVGC radio, hometown radio, 1340 and 96.5 out here in Jackson and Amador and Calaveras counties. We love high school football here as well. I want to thank you for taking the time out today to spend some time with our listeners and share all your insight and experience around the governance of high school football. So I really appreciate that.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me on. And I really enjoy it. And sometimes it's nice just to be able to talk football and a little bit of the governance side, answer any questions that the public might have. And so hopefully they get some out of it, enjoyed it. And thank you for having me on. It's greatly appreciated.
You bet. So thanks to Mr. Jason Feuerbach, the Associate Commissioner for the CIF Sac Joaquin Section. I know he's a busy man, so thank you for taking that time out of your schedule. Remember, if you have any questions or have any comments and you'd like for us to air in a future episode, follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Let's Talk Football with Coach Val, or you could always shoot us an email at gilbertvaltierra@gmail.com. Until next time, we are out. And it's intercepted. It's intercepted by number 22. That's Clifton. He's got the left edge. Turns on the Jets. Still on his feet. Touchdown, Calaveras. What a play. Up to a running back. That's Ferrante over to the right side. He cuts back up the middle. He's got room. One man to beat. He turns on the Jets. There he goes. Touchdown.